Don't go live yet. We're live. Hello. We'll see on the screen in a second. Hello, everyone. How are you? Around the world, I see your notes coming in. Just going to hit refresh on my screen to see what comes up. How's everyone doing today? If you hear a rumble, you may see that, yeah, our orientation is off. We'll be correct this in just a second. Be patient, everyone. Yep, 1 second.
Want to do it this way?
Yeah, we'll just do it this way. Sorry, everyone. We had this all lined up and good to go. But there we go. We'll just give this a second. There we go. I'm right side up now. Woo! Let's start again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Oh Yum 101 Cheesecake. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited, and I know you are, because the questions that have been coming in are amazing. And you, together as a group, are asking all the questions that I am here to answer. So hello to everyone around the world from rainy Malaysia. If you hear some rumbling, that's not my stomach hungry from making cheesecake. It could be thundering any second here in Southern Ontario in Canada. Hello to England, to Portugal, to Macedonia. I see all of you writing your questions. And of course, I have to do the shout out to my mom and dad in Michino, Suzanne, who brought lovely flowers this morning, to Bonnie down the street, who will enjoy some of this cheesecake. Happy birthday to T. Hi, Kathy. So let's get right to it. Cheesecake 101. There's so much to talk about right now. And right off the top, let's talk about the style that I'm going to make. This is a New York cheesecake, which I think is, in the whole family of cheesecakes, the cornerstone recipe. It's very simple. It's vanilla flavored. It's got the graham crumb crust. It goes with an assortment of fruits, which is great because as fruit season, now that we're heading into summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're heading into our different fruit seasons. One recipe can turn into multiple desserts throughout the season. So what we want to start with is the crust. So this recipe has a graham crust, and I've got a cup of graham cracker crumbs here, 225 grams. And a question that a lot of you, including Niam, was asking, well, if you live, especially in the UK, you don't have access to graham cracker crumbs. And so digestive biscuits work ideally. And a few of you also were talking about, well, can you use other cookie crumbs as an option? You certainly can. Even a chocolate chip cookie recipe without the chocolate chips can be ground into crumbs. What you want to do is think of a dry biscuit or cookie to use as your crumb base. That way it will retain some of the crunch at the bottom of the crust, but also hold in some of the moisture, and it won't fall apart under the weight of this really tall cheesecake. So to help build in crunch, which Aisha had asked, she said she finds her cheesecake crust is soggy. Adding 2 tablespoons of sugar sweetens up the crust a little bit. That sets when you bake the crust, and that adds a little bit of crunch, and it protects the crust from getting too soggy. And now I've got a 1/4 cup or 60 grams of butter melted. And it doesn't really matter here if you're using salted or unsalted. Just gonna give this a stir. And there's nothing technical here. You're just looking to moisten the crumbs with the butter evenly. So you don't want to see any dry bits. Now, oh, good point. Gabrielle was saying you can use shortbread cookies and ginger snaps. Those are some great ideas. So you're thinking along the right lines. I know we're in this together, that it's that dry, crispy cookie, nothing too soft or squishy that works here. Now, you do need a springform pan when it comes to making a cheesecake. It would be virtually impossible to get a cheesecake out of a regular cake pan that didn't have the distinct separated sides and springform ring. You could, if you needed to, put a sheet of parchment inside of a cake pan as an option. Just be prepared that as the cheesecake contracts, the paper might pucker a little bit, so you won't get that perfectly round shape. But at least it gives you an option. Now, if you've seen me on my other Oh Yum videos bake before, you may have seen this tip. Now, when you buy a springform pan, it's sold to you with the lip of the base up. And if you've ever made a cheesecake with the lip up, you can find it's difficult to get your spatula in to get the cheesecake out of the pan. So, simple trick, upside down. Now you've got the lip facing down. It latches into the pan very easily, and you're all set. When you take the cheesecake out, you can slide your spatula in and you're all set. Now, I'm not greasing my springform pan at this point. I'm just going to put the crumbs in the base. And just using the back of my spoon, I'm going to press the crust to coat the complete bottom. Now, in this particular recipe, in a classic New York cheesecake, you don't have crumbs up the side of the cheesecake. But if you love that crumb crust, well, you can multiply this recipe 1.5 times, and then you can press the crust up the sides too. But just a nice even layer here. This is the easiest part of the recipe. There we go. Now, this takes 10 minutes in a 350 oven, and I'll pop that in. And you won't see any visible difference after the 10-minute mark, but what it does is it's crisping up the crust, it's setting it so it can take the cheesecake filling. 10 minutes, here we go. All right, now I want to see some of your questions because we've got a lot of really good questions you've been asking in this Cheesecake 101 session. I see, oh, I didn't recap what size the pan is. That, for this recipe that you will see, and when this gets rebroadcast, it will follow beneath this recipe. It makes a 9-inch or 23-centimeter cheesecake. You can make it in a 7-inch. That would be an 18-centimeter pan, and just simply cut the recipe in half, which I've done for the swaps, as you will soon see. Okay. Ooh, good. Justin, we're getting right into the heart of the matter. What kind of cheeses can be used for a cheesecake aside from cream cheese? Well, I've got a great recipe here on Oh Yum for a ricotta cheesecake with a biscotti crust. It's got a nice sweetness to it. Dry cottage cheese is a common cheese used in cheesecake. You can even use what's called a baker's cheese, which is in that same vein, and it's actually lower fat. But for the average home cook, and for that classic creamy yet fluffy cheesecake, brick cream cheese is the best. Softened to room temperature. You can pull it from the fridge an hour before you want to work with it. I like to then dice it up and let it sit for an hour, and I find that softens up very nicely. Now, we're going to walk through a lot of your common questions, including lots of substitutions, variations, etc., as we go through it. So let's talk about the foundation recipe. So this is, you're going to get inside my brain for a minute here. When it comes to creating a recipe, you start with foundation ratios, how ingredients relate in certain proportion to each other. And then that allows you to make variations. So for any sort of fundamental brick cream cheese recipe, for every 1 250-gram package of cream cheese, you would add 70 grams or 1/3 of a cup of sugar for every 1 package of cream cheese, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and a 1/4 cup of liquid. That could be cream, lemon juice, buttermilk, sour cream, what have you. So that foundation ratio is what I have in my head, and I multiply that up to fit in a pan, and then I start tweaking and tailoring it. So I'll just recap that, and I will send that to our channel manager, TJ, so he can include it below in the text when this gets rebroadcast, along with this original recipe. So to recap, for a foundation, for every one package, 250 grams of cream cheese, you've got 70 grams of sugar, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and a 1/4 cup of a liquid. So you multiply that up to fit in a pan. In this recipe, I've got 4 packages of cream cheese, a full kilo of cream cheese. So for that, you multiply all those proportions, but then to get that New York cheesecake flavor and texture, it's about a lot of sour cream. So then I start playing with the other ingredients so they all balance out. So the first thing we want to do, it's very important. You're going to hear me say this throughout the whole process. Scrape your bowl, scrape your bowl, scrape your bowl. That's how you get a cheesecake filling without lumps. So first I'm going to whip this up. Oh, hello to Costa Rica and Mexico. Ooh, Anna's asking a good question. Can I make homemade cream cheese? I have not tried making homemade cream cheese. The closest I've come is making a yogurt style cheese called skewer. It's an Icelandic cheese, but it's more in the style of yogurt. I have made a cheesecake from it, a beautiful blueberry one, which you can actually find on the OEM site here. Oh, okay, that's great. Amy Rosen has a kosher cooking cookbook, and so Michael's saying she's got a recipe for homemade cream cheese. That's worth checking out. Okay, so we've softened the cream cheese. I've scraped my bowl. Now I've got my sugar. So 1 1/4 cups or 250 grams. And the key is to add it a little at a time. Basically, I'll add it in 3 additions and scrape the bowl after each addition. So this sugar is going to dissolve into the cream cheese. This softens it up. You'll find it gets smoother and softer and almost more fluid by the time I finish adding the sugar here. I have made this this cheesecake recipe using half brown sugar and half white granulated, and you get more of a toffee or caramel flavor. It's great if you want to top the cheesecake with something like caramelized bananas. At this point, when you're adding your sugar, when you're adding your flavorings, you can beat your cream cheese on high speed, on medium speed. You don't have to worry about how long you beat it, you don't have to worry about overbeating it. At this point, you want to get everything in incorporated and nice and fluffy. I like that. Second addition of the sugar. Pardon me? Oh, Michael's zooming in so you can see the mixture beating. Oh, hello from Vancouver. Good morning. Oh, Sandra, you are asking the ever important question. From Tennessee, it's a question asked around the world. How do you keep that cheesecake from cracking? And Fatima, I saw your notes before we went live and earlier about different cooking methods and how to make a cheesecake if you don't have an oven. And I will get to that when it's time to go to the oven. So here I go again. Scrape my bowl, scrape my bowl. But you can see now, it almost has the texture of whipped cream at this point. It's that sugar liquefying in the cream cheese. It is a great idea to make sure you use the block cream cheese that's firmer, especially for a New York cheesecake, as opposed to the tubs of the softer. You can use light cream cheese, but it's cheesecake. Okay, all of that sugar, the 250 grams has been added. One more scrape of the bowl. There we go. Now, some other things to add include cornstarch. Now, this, you'll see some cheesecake recipes call for adding a bit of flour. the same measurement, or cornstarch. If you don't have cornstarch, you can use the same measurement, 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. You can use tapioca starch. The reason it's called for in this recipe, and it is got a function, it helps keep the cheesecake creamy, because as the cheesecake is slowly baking in the oven, it is helping the eggs from over coagulating, and then you end up with a cheesecake that crumbles. If you have a recipe that calls for cream cheese and eggs and no starch, you want to make sure then you're using a water bath, a bain-marie. So this is kind of helping you, Fatima, because you want to gently cook those eggs without curdling them. But the starch helps you ensure that you're going to get that creamy texture there. I'll also add my flavor at the same time. Now, a New York cheesecake has a little bit of lemon zest. It's not to make it taste lemony necessarily, but it does kind of accentuate the nice tanginess that cream cheese has. So I'm just putting in just about a teaspoon. And then you would add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, or this is a great opportunity that if you have an actual whole vanilla bean or vanilla bean paste, you can use that, because the slow cooking of this cheesecake means it's going to draw out that flavor. And because it's got that beautiful white color to it, you'll see the speckle of the seeds. So it's up to you, but a 1-to-1 substitution. If the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and so then you would replace it with 2 teaspoons of the vanilla bean paste. And again, I can do this on high speed if I want. And I'll scrape down the bowl right to the bottom. You notice I have a plate here just because you make a big mess if you keep having to set down your dirty spatula on the kitchen counter. All right. Oh, hello, sunshine and sky. Oh, Cherry, hi, nice to welcome back again. We're going to talk about cracking, but we're going to get cracking with some eggs now. Now, this is very, very important, a technical point. We call this dessert cheesecake. What a dramatic moment to hit pause. I have to go pull my crust from the oven. I have one already made and cooled, so we didn't have to wait for it. It's important to let that crust cool before you put your cheesecake filling in. If you put the filling in while your crust is hot, it will make the crust go soft. So this is 10 minutes out of the oven. It doesn't look different. It doesn't turn brown. I'll let that cool, but we have our cooled crust to start with. Back to the eggs. Okay, so the dessert is called cheesecake, but I want you to get the cake part out of your head, because this is actually a custard. When you think of creme brulee, the combination of egg yolks and whipping cream, gently baked, slowly baked. Creme caramel, whole eggs and milk and a little cream, gently baked, slowly baked. A custard, a pastry cream, heated milk, eggs, a little cornstarch to thicken it. Cheesecake is not a cake, it's actually a custard. So in place of cream or milk, we've got cream cheese, and we're adding eggs to that will slowly and gently cook to cook it. So this is what I want you to wrap your head around, because in terms of the way you cook your cheesecake, this is how you prevent the cracking, is with the gradual cooking process. So what I need is I'm going to crack 3 eggs into my dish and 1 egg yolk. I just found that in playing with this recipe, 4 whole eggs was just too much. I got too much lift, and then this is where cracking can happen. So by separating an egg and just reducing, so 3 whole eggs and 1 yolk gives you the right amount of that silky satiny texture. You'll be happy with that end result. So the key now, this is very important. Part of preventing the cracking in your cheesecake is when it comes time to add your eggs, you add them 1 at a time. You mix well, but you mix on low speed. The key now is not to aerate your cheesecake anymore. We've made the cream cheese nice and fluffy, but if you start incorporating air into your eggs, they're going to remember that that air is in there. And as your cheesecake bakes, I mean, it's great when you have a sponge cake, you want it to rise up. But when eggs hold that air and rise up, and then they cool down and collapse, that's where you get the crack in the cheesecake. So on low speed, I'll add my eggs one at a time. And guess what I'm going to do? Stop and scrape my bowl. How's everyone doing so far? Cheesecake 101. It was overwhelming how you voted for this out of sort of the classic recipes here on Oh Yum. So I'm really glad you picked this one. It is a favorite. We've got a great idea. I can see by some of your requests coming in with fruit season here that you may be wanting to make some fruit desserts. And there's a certain pastry that I will like to focus, but I want you to vote on the flavor, the fruit flavor. Okay, so I didn't go higher than low speed. And this isn't why I'm using the paddle attachment on my mixer. If you're using electric beaters, just use the regular beaters. Don't use the whip attachment on your beaters. And the same thing, just on slow speed. Now my next egg. Now, while we're here and I'm mixing my eggs on low speed one at a time, let's talk about how this is such a great foundation recipe and you can create your own flavors without doing anything different to this recipe. So if you wanted to make this a chocolate cheesecake, you would take this recipe and sift in a half a cup, that's 70 grams of cocoa powder, and 2 ounces of melted dark chocolate. That gets added at the very end. Everything else remains the same. If you want to turn this into a lemon cheesecake, well, you add a full zest of 1 lemon and you replace half a cup of the sour cream with lemon juice. And then you get a nice tangy lemon cheesecake. I'm going to keep adding here. If you want to do a marble cheesecake, you divide this batter in half and you add 2 ounces of melted chocolate to 1/2 of the batter and you alternate dollop in your cheesecake pan and you give it a swirl with a skewer. If you want to turn this into a pumpkin cheesecake, you add 1 1/3 cups or 280 grams of pure pumpkin puree and a teaspoon and a half of pumpkin pie spice. One recipe all of a sudden turns into all these flavors. And if you want to make a white chocolate cheesecake, you really like a sweet cheesecake, stir in 5 ounces of melted white chocolate into this entire recipe. And I'll include those variations below. So when this gets posted, so you can watch later. I know some of you are up late. If you're in Southeast Asia or Australia watching, you might be heading to bed soon. So you can catch up on the rest of this later. Okay, so the eggs have been added. And the very last thing to add is what really defines a New York cheesecake, a lot of sour cream. And Fatima, you were asking about what is a good substitution for sour cream. Greek yogurt would be your best substitution. I would recommend, though, go full fat with the yogurt. And definitely when you're baking the cheesecake with using sour cream, you want to use full fat sour cream. And the reason is your low fat and your fat-free sour creams are often set with gelatins or gums, and they're great to use when you're making a dip or to put on top of a dish. But when you actually heat it, it will liquefy and turn into water, and you'll find you might have a cheesecake that cracks, or you won't get that same creamy texture to your cheesecake. You can make your own sour cream, which is actually creme fraiche. You have to do this a full day to 2 days ahead, and you would take 1 cup of whipping cream, stir in a tablespoon of lemon juice, put it in a glass bowl, cover it, and then you leave it in a warm place. To warm it up, sometimes I put the bowl in a larger bowl of hot tap water, and that warms up the cream. After 24 hours, it has naturally soured. Don't stir it, put it in the fridge, and you'll find you get a separation, a little buttermilk or whey at the bottom, and you'll get the thicker, actual real soured whipping cream. So that's creme fraiche. Now, because my eggs are in here, I'm stirring in the sour cream on low speed. You can even do this by hand if you wanted to. How's everyone doing? Anna Kent is asking yogurt. Yes, but Greek yogurt. You need that thicker yogurt and definitely full fat. Ooh, Cherry's asking, how about a matcha cheesecake recipe? All you would have to do is add the matcha green tea powder when you add your cornstarch, your vanilla, and the lemon zest would be nice. Ooh, even a little bit of fresh grated ginger if you're adding the matcha. I would say for this recipe, I haven't tested it, Cherry, but I would suggest no more than a tablespoon, only because matcha, you know, it can get really bitter if you use too much of it. There we go. Just going to get that out of the way. That is a lot of cheesecake batter. So I have my cooled crust. This is in my 9-inch, 23-centimeter pan. If you're just joining me now, you are here for Oh Yum 101 cheesecake tutorial. We are really getting through a lot of information here. Now, if you'll remember, when I baked the crust, the pan was ungreased. Now, I do want the cheesecake to release from the sides. So what I do is I brush the sides with just a little bit of melted butter. And I didn't do this beforehand because it would simply just drip down the pan as the crust was baking. So I do it after the cake was cooled. And I did mention that if you didn't use a springform pan, you wouldn't want to line this pan with parchment paper because it would pucker the moisture from this cheesecake custard. There we go. And now this gets poured into the pan. This is a big recipe. So if you don't have a pan this size, you can make it smaller. But this recipe is designed to fit a 9-inch pan right to the top. And there's another layer to go on top of this too. I'll just clear this out of the way. Now what I like to do at this point is give the pan a tap. So if there were any air bubbles just in scraping out the batter, that last bit of stirring, they'll rise to the surface. I seem to be good there. Oh, just one or two. Now, this is the next part. When it comes to making a cheesecake that's cooked through evenly, doesn't souffle too much, and definitely doesn't crack, it's all about the baking. So what we need to do is we need to cook this custard. A reminder again, this is a custard. We need to get the heat all the way through it. But if it gets too hot on the outside before the middle is set, you're going to get that lift around the outside edge, but then it's going to collapse. And because of the nature of this cheesecake, it will pull away from the center. And that's where a crack will develop. And sometimes the crack can happen after the fact. It comes out of the oven looking fine, but the crack develops as it cools and collapses. So we want to avoid too much souffling, but we need to get the heat to the center. So the key is start high and then get lower, 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 lower. Because of this ratio, I don't have a lot of eggs in this recipe. This is a cheesecake that is dry baked. So you're not putting it in a pan, in a water bath, to then partially steam and gently cook the cheesecake. What we do is, so I've got my oven at 400 degrees. That sounds crazy, because it is. It's crazy hot. You're going to put it in at 400 degrees for just 10 minutes. If you've got a basic home oven, it will probably take 10 minutes to heat up or less, from 350 to 400. You're going to set that timer for 400 degrees, 200 Celsius. After that 10 minutes, you turn the oven right down to half that amount, 225 Fahrenheit, and you set the timer for 35 minutes. In that course of 35 minutes, the oven is going to cool down and cool down and cool down, and gently the heat is getting through the cheesecake, through it, through it, through it. Then I'm just going to pop this cheesecake in. This is where an oven thermometer comes in handy. I'm just going to pull this out for a second so you can see it. So even though, just set my timer. Even though you set your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 Celsius, your oven may not actually live there. So this is an inexpensive little tool. and you either hang it on your oven rack, or you set it on the oven floor, and you watch it. And you want to see how quickly and slowly your oven cools down. So over the course of, after the first 10 minutes at 200 Fahrenheit, you turn down the oven to 225, so half that amount. You're going to watch it slowly cool. By about minute 15, check your timer. You should be at about 300 degrees or 150 Celsius. And then you know you can either turn up the oven if it's cooling down too quickly, or open the door a little bit to cool it down a little faster. So then after that, that's the active cook time of your cheesecake. Then at that point, you turn the oven off and you let it sit for half an hour with no heat on the oven, but you've just got this nice, warm, cozy environment. The oven's going to keep cooling, but gradually with the oven door closed. After 30 minutes, you crack the oven door, you put a wooden spoon in it, and you let it sit for another 30 minutes. So it's that gradual cooking from starting high, the heat gets through, to gradual cooling is really the key to preventing a cheesecake that doesn't crack in the center. And I want to get to, Fatima asked a question about steaming this. So I did, Fatima, talk about the water bath, the fact that you could put the pan in a water bath for an eggier style recipe, and you would actually cover it. So if you don't have an oven and what you're using is a bamboo or wok steamer, you probably want to look at a slightly different style of recipe. This suits the dry bake oven. What I would recommend, and talking about different styles of cheesecake, the Japanese cheesecake, sometimes called the cotton cheesecake, which is made by melting cream cheese with milk or cream, and then you fold in egg yolks and whipped egg whites. So it's kind of a combination of cake and cheesecake. That recipe, and I do have a version on Oyum, I should say, that really suits a steaming method. So I would give that one a try. Very good question. Oh, hello from Bulgaria and Mexico. Okay, Umar's asking, oh, this is a good question. When I bake literally anything, it bakes on the top and is quite wet in the middle. Now, that's a great question, Umar, that you've mentioned. And it goes back to your oven temperature. And we rely on our dials. We set it and we assume that the temperature is correct. But you may be setting your oven temperature and it's actually cooking a couple of degrees too hot. So things look baked on the surface, but they're not actually cooked through. So what you need is that thermometer inside your oven. And then you start, you have to make friends with your oven, especially if you're going to make cheesecakes. You have to know that sweet spot. When you're baking a cheesecake in a conventional oven, it should bake on the middle rack. But if things are looking done on the surface, but they're not, if they're wet and soft in the center, that's a sign that your oven is running hot. So then you would, if the recipe calls for it to be set at 180 or 350 Fahrenheit, you reduce it by 10 degrees Celsius or 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think you'll find you get a better result. So I hope that answers your questions. Great questions. Oh, Luciano is asking, how do I make sure the crust remains crunchy? That's a great recap, because if you came in earlier, you want to use a dry biscuit, like a graham cracker crumb or a digestive cookie. I add 2 tablespoons of sugar to the crust, because when that bakes, that sets it up and makes it even crispier. And it's very important to let that crust cool completely before you put your cheesecake filling in, because then it will stay nice and crisp while your cheesecake bakes. Really great question. I'm glad I can recap right now. And Tina's making it right now. Woo! So now, Tinu, you're going to have to wait just like I am, because this cheesecake is going to take a while. But I'm not going to make you come back. I've got lots of cheesecakes to share. Sharing the cheesecake love. Right before we started live, I pulled this cheesecake from the oven directly. So it had gone through that whole gradual baking process, starting at a high temp, bring it down, let it slowly bake for half an hour as the oven cooled. Then I cracked the oven door, let it gradually cool. It's still warm to the touch, but this is the next part in a New York cheesecake recipe, is the sour cream topper. So I do recommend this, even if you've gone through all of the cheesecake steps of beating your cream cheese well, scraping your bowl often, slowing the mixer down when you add your eggs, your gentle cooking process. If still you see a crack develop, you can, while your cheesecake's still warm, add this sour cream topping and it'll fill in that crack should it happen. I'm excited to see, I don't have a sign of a crack here. It's got a nice color, and I should actually recap to check the doneness of your cheesecake after you've gone through this process. You will see that it starts lifting at the sides a little bit. The center of your cheesecake should not be shiny. It should lose its shine. This has a even matte surface to it, but about this much in the center of the cheesecake will still have a little jiggle, a little movement to it. It'll be set around the edges. But because this cheesecake is so hot and even all the way through, it will continue cooking out of the oven. So within half an hour, and it's been just about half an hour, you'll see that this cheesecake is set in the center. So while it's still warm, you want to put a sour cream layer on top for a New York style cheesecake. So I've got 3/4 of a cup or 175 ml of sour cream. That's the same amount I added to the cheesecake batter itself. So a full cup and a half of sour cream, or if you don't have sour cream, you're using full fat Greek yogurt. I'll just add a couple tablespoons of sugar to that and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. No egg goes into this because this cheesecake is not going back in the oven, but the lemon juice is going to thicken the sour cream as it sets. So it creates sort of a distinctive tangy layer on top of the New York cheesecake. And it also, I don't know if you can pick up on the color difference here. We have a nice buttery yellow cheesecake, but we've got a really white sour cream topping. So it really gives it a nice polished, clean look on top of the cheesecake. Oh, we've got an appreciation of the Zoom. Hi, Jordan from Hawaii. I'm good today. Jojo girl. All right. Now that this is stirred together, so the lemon juice will thicken as this cools and sets. And you want to put it on while the cheesecake is warm. It softens up the cheesecake, it softens up the sour cream a bit, so you can spread a nice even layer. I'll just use, and you want to be gentle because remember, this cheesecake is hot from the oven, so it's fragile. It hasn't been chilled yet. Just spread this right to the ends. Now, I noticed a question earlier from Smiley Girl asking about using gelatin in a cheesecake. Gelatin or agar, if you're cooking vegetarian, is good for a no-bake style cheesecake. So this style, it doesn't need the gelatin. You have the eggs to set it. So you're looking at a different style of cheesecake, which is, you know, there's so many different styles and recipes out there. But this is sort of that classic foundation cheesecake, this New York style cheesecake. Now, the last step before, oh, and just one more thing, because I know it was, Jolly was asking about an egg-free version of cheesecake. I have tried making this cheesecake using silken tofu in place of eggs. Obviously, the flaxseed egg substitute wouldn't work well here. You'd end up having speckles and a strange texture to your cheesecake. But for every 1 egg, puree 60 grams of silken tofu. So in this case, that would be 180, 210 grams of silken tofu blitzed into the batter, mixed in, will set your cheesecake. Nothing else has to change. And then you've got an egg-free cheesecake. So the last thing I want to do while the cheesecake is warm, and you want to do this within, I usually try and wait 10 minutes, but you've got up to half an hour. That's my symbol to turn down my oven right down to 225. And that's going to go for another 35 minutes in there. So another key to preventing cracking in your cheesecake is to loosen it from the sides of the pan. Because over the next, this cheesecake will take, a good 3 hours to cool down. And in that 3 hours, just like that slow, gradual cooling and temperature change from the oven, your cheesecake is going to contract a little bit. Those eggs are going to cool within and contract and contract. And if there is that tendency, that wish for the cheesecake to crack, it can happen because as it contracts, if it's stuck to the sides, it'll pull from the center, making the crack. So if you loosen your cheesecake from the sides, as it contracts, then it will just go in a little bit and you won't get that crack in the center. It's really all about preventing the crack. So what I like to do is I start where you can see the seam at the latch of the cheesecake. I just start there out of habit because that tends to be the roughest part of the cheesecake anyhow. Run your spatula and really press it against the outside of your springform pan to loosen it. And I go around another time because I get right in there. I can feel the crust. And then I lift up where I started. And that's it. And now this is ready to keep cooling until it's time to chill. So cheesecake, I know you know, it's definitely a make ahead. You don't make it 10 minutes before your guests are about to arrive. You plan a day ahead. So you let this cool for 3 hours, and I like to chill it for at least 6. So it's just a good tip. If you can, make it a day ahead and let it cool overnight in the fridge. Now, we had another great question about, Trisha was asking earlier about getting that cheesecake out of the pan. And that has its own, I don't need the hot water yet, Michael, but that's the cheesecake slicing tip that's about to come. I'm going to grab, thank you. My cheesecake that I made yesterday that chilled overnight. There it is. I've got cheesecake everywhere. It's kind of crazy. So you can see that sour cream topping has fully set and it's ready to come out of the pan. Now I've got, my mom's watching, she'll appreciate this. This was my grandma's cake platter. She was my inspiration to become a baker. She loved baking. And I think it was that sense, and you're bakers, you know, baking isn't just about getting to the dessert to eat it. It's that commitment of time to share with those you love. So that's what I picked up from my grandmother. And Bonnie, if you're watching, this cake lifter actually started its life in this house. Bonnie lives down the street from me and just gave me this a couple of weeks ago. And her grandmother, if I have this correctly, lived in this house. I live in a big old house, old house. And when she first got married, was given this as part of her wedding gifts. And so this lifter started its life in this house, and she just thought it was perfect that it comes back. So when it comes to a classic dessert, I like a classic preparation. So now we need to get this cheesecake out of the pan. So once again, because it's had time to set, even though I loosened it before it went into the fridge, I'm gonna run my palette knife again, starting at the latch, pushing that knife around pushing it against the outside edge, trying to avoid a bruise or a dent. Lift it straight up. Fingers crossed. There we go. Okay, so it's expected because we brushed the pan with a little butter. You get that nice golden browning in a New York style cheesecake. You can see the crust. You can see the distinction with the white topping. Now, this is why you have your springform pan base upside down. So the lip is down. So when you put your palette knife in, and I kind of treat the palette knife almost like a saw, and I start from the outside, and I'm loosening it. Woo, it just slid right off. There we go. If you find you have a tendency for your cheesecake bases to stick, I would make a thicker crust because that just gives you more of a barrier between the cheesecake. And then you slide it off. I find I have been told that you can, I've tried putting parchment paper at the base of the pan, but I find that can get puckered or wrinkled, and then you're just juggling the cheesecake trying to get the parchment paper off of it. So this can be topped with, move that out of the way, with a fruit sauce, a simple strawberry as a garnish if you wanted to. You could put fresh strawberries on top. I do like to serve a New York cheesecake with a fruit sauce of some sort. So I thought, let's just add, since we're having a cheesecake tutorial, let's add a quick sauce lesson here. And I'm going to make a simple raspberry coulis to serve with it. Of course, a blueberry sauce, cherries, whatever will work. Now, the simple ratio when you're making a fruit coulis, and a fruit coulis is a fresh or barely cooked fruit sauce that is then pureed and then strained. So it's smooth, it's refreshing, and it should have a freshness about it, where a compote has the texture of the cooked fruit in it, and you develop flavor, or you can add things to it. A fruit coulis is supposed to be relatively simple. So all you have to remember is whether fresh or frozen fruit, it doesn't matter. I've got frozen raspberries. For the weight of the berries, you add 20% sugar. So I have 250 grams of raspberries that have been frozen and thawed. So I have 50 grams or a quarter cup of sugar to add to that. That's all you have to remember. I'm going to give this puree. And then we'll strain it. Go. Oh, yeah. Lovely color and flavor there. And now, this just goes right into a bowl to be strained. You really don't want to eat those seeds, so we'll just get this out of the way. And I find it's easiest to use a whisk. Just push that coulis in. When you're using an immersion blender or a little chopper like I just used, you're also breaking down the seeds a little bit, and that releases the pectin. That's what naturally sets jams. And that's in the skins and seeds of fruits. So that's why you'll find that without even cooking it, it thickens up a little bit. And you don't have to throw away this nicely sweetened seed mixture. You can put that into your next round of sticky buns, work it into a fruit pie. So I'll just set that aside. So we've got our nice little fruit coulis. And I think, Michael, if we can run the hot water and fill a pitcher, we need to get to serving our cheesecake. I'm going to move this out of the way. Let's take a few more questions while we're just waiting for the water to heat up, because I'll show you how to cut the cheesecake too, so you get nice clean slices. And I'm catching some great conversations here. Ashok is asking, my oven does not have a fan, so it gets hot super soon. How should I manage that while baking the cake? Well, Ashok, this is a great recipe for you to get to know your oven. So if it heats up quickly, I guess the question is, does it cool down as quickly, or does it take longer? My oven actually takes longer to cool down because it's got an iron floor to it. So what I would say, if it takes longer to cool down, don't start at as high a temperature, and then just keep track of it. It is that gradual cooking process. Ultimately, once you get to that center that has that little jiggle, but everything else is set, that's your end goal. If you have to turn your oven back on to get that heat back in there, you can do that with this recipe. The only point you can't is once it comes out of the oven and you get the sour cream on top, you can't put it back in. So I hope that answers your question. Serge, what are some of the hardest things for you to bake? What does a pro find challenging? Well, you know what? That's a good question. And it's different for everyone. As you can tell, I just get so excited about technical things. I consider myself a technician. When it comes to decorating and piping detail, I get stressed. In wedding cakes, I get nervous about doing wedding cakes. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to doing a wedding cake. But I really, I love getting fussy about the details and the whys behind recipes. So I would say my biggest challenges are cake decorating and macarons they're tricky. So I've made a lot of mistakes along the way making macaron. And there's a reason why making French macaron, if you do a baker's apprenticeship, it takes 3 years. You always learn macaron in your 3rd year because it just takes that sense of finesse and judgment. So I'd say that's one of the more challenging things. But I still I'm fearless about anything. I'll give anything a try. So that's a fun question. I did have fun playing with the Japanese cheesecake. That can be a little tricky to do. And I have a good recipe here on Oh Yum, and I've been working with other versions. So that's another fun challenge, but a challenge I really took on with gusto and appreciated. Great question. Oh, hi, Abby, asking whether I host baking classes in Ontario. Well, I do classes often and across the country, but these days, of course, yeah, I think we may see things change because getting together in groups may not be the way we function anymore. So we'll have to look at, I think this Oh Yum 101 style of baking session may be more the way we go these days. We'll have to see. So you're probably wondering, as I'm chatting and answering questions, what on earth am I doing? So Michael just got me a pitcher full of very hot tap water, and I've got a chef's knife that I'm immersing in the hot tap water to warm up the knife. Because when it comes time to slice a cheesecake, it's partly about using the knife to cut it and using the heat to melt the cheesecake to get a nice clean slice. So, Warda, you're asking if I have a cookbook. I've got quite a few. My most recent cookbook is called Set for the Holidays, and my sort of all-purpose baking book, most recent, is called Bake with Hannah Olson. And so if you visit my website, you can see access, and you can order any of these books if you can't get it shipped to you in ebook form too. So thank you for that question. Tina's asking for a Charlotte next week. We'll see. I've had a lot of requests, Tina, for working on pie pastry and really mastering pie dough. So next week, come back to Oh Yum 101, and I will really walk you through, just like I did this cheesecake, the hows to make a really flaky, tender, delicious pie pastry. And you'll get to pick the filling by voting. So keep your eye on our community page when the poll will go up on Saturday. So with the hot knife, I dried it off first and I made my first slice. And then it's very important to pull the knife back, not up, because if you have any crumbs, it might catch and you won't get a clean line. And then this pitcher doubles as a way to rinse off my knife. There we go. And a little taping trick I picked up is when you want to get that perfect first slice, the first slice is the hardest slice. You actually go over a little bit. So I don't know if you can see. Can you see, Michael? So instead of meeting the knife point at the tip, you actually cross over just a little bit. And then I know this slice will come out easily. So down, pull back. Let's put this lovely lifter to use. Look at that beautiful, clean slice. The lifter works wonderfully, Bonnie. And you can see it's creamy. Can you pick up on the separation of the sour cream layer on top? The crust has a crispness to it because it's nice and thick. It has that added sugar, and I made sure to let it cool. Now, it's up to you if you want to put the sauce on top. Just some simple fresh berries would be nice along the side. I think I'm going to Instead of drizzling the sauce on top, I'm just going to do a nice little pool beside it. And there you go. I want to take a picture of this to put on our page here. So I'm going to cut another slice for myself that I can actually eat, if that's okay. Oh, Manju. Hello, Mississauga. Oh, I wish I could do, I miss doing baking classes. But you know what? This OEM has 101 has really offered me a great chance to connect with you. And I'm really enjoying getting your questions. Great questions. Oh, good question. If I'm just starting to bake, what size cake pan would you recommend? Most recipes call for an 8 or 9 inch, so a 20 or 23 centimeter round cake pan, whether it's springform or not. If you buy a springform pan, yes, you can make cakes in it, but you can, and you can make cheesecakes. If you buy just a regular cake pan, you can only make cakes, not cheesecake. And now in that time, I've talked and my knife has cooled down. So do one more slice. Because we're not entertaining in big groups these days, if you're making that full recipe with the 4 packages of cream cheese and you don't have guests to serve it to or drop it off to, as I will be doing later, then you can freeze cheesecake. Cut it into quarters to enjoy later. Just keep it well protected. It will get squished if you start packing lots of things on top of it. This has been great. I'm looking at my checklist of questions here. We covered how to get it on. We've talked about these, avoiding all the mistakes. We've got our substitutions here. I'm going to grab a fork. Okay, I see there was a question asking about cookbook recommendations. Well, I love collecting cookbooks, so I don't just rely on the recipes I develop. I love seeing what other people are doing. If you want to get technical, I recommend looking into textbooks, baking textbooks, because that's where the lessons lie and these foundation recipes. And I know you, my OEM viewers, are such keen bakers. You really want to get those foundation recipes and then explore and get imaginative afterwards. There's an author, last name Gislin, Wayne Gislin, has a fantastic baking textbook, and it's actually used in cooking schools. The Culinary Institute of America has a tome of a cookbook, baking and pastry. And then my husband Michael said, and if you want to cook with pork, you gotta go for his cookbook, Living High Off the Hog. Okay, so you can see the interior of this cheesecake. We've got the perfect slicing. We've talked through all the how-to. It's really about working your way to avoid the cracking, but you want a delicious, creamy, yet somehow fluffy cheesecake at the same time. Oh, it just melts away. It's a nice reminder that a cheesecake is not a cake, it's actually a custard. And with all these tips, I really hope you will try this recipe, whether in its full large form or cut in half. And do remember, anytime you make anything from the OYum channel, post it on hashtag OYum101. I see them, I follow. If you've posted, you know I comment, I flag, I heart. So it's great to see what you're making and baking these days. And I'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday for Pie Pastry OYum 101. Have a great weekend, everyone.